Hello. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Margaret Lowe Smith. I'm president of Atlantic Live. I think, as we all know, the curtains close on the Republican convention tonight, and we're concluding our programming with this forum on women in politics. And just by looking around this room, I can tell how resonant a topic this is. This is by far the best crowd we've had here. So thank you all so much for being here. I really want to thank the three organizations who've made this gathering possible, our underwriters, and they are All In Together, Running Start, and She Should Run. Thank you all. We'll get to hear from those women in a little bit. And before we dive in, a couple of notes. We're going to have time for your questions at the end of every session. And we are on Twitter. Use the hashtag #TheAtlanticRNC. That's the Atlantic RNC. And as everybody can see, C-SPAN is here, capturing it all. We're delighted about that. And now the topic at hand. The numbers tell the story. Women make up half the population, but just 20% of the House and Senate. And it's a similar tale in state legislatures across the country. And even though we'll have a woman at the top of a major party presidential ticket for the first time in history, there is a clear gap in the numbers. So the question we want to address today is why that is, and what would make life in public service both desirable and attainable for women. To kick off the conversation, I'm delighted to welcome Marcia Blackburn, who represents the 7th District of Tennessee in the House. Welcome. And she is here with my colleague, Alex Wagner, senior editor at The Atlantic, to lead the conversation.
Thank you guys so much for joining us, and props to all the people that ordered wine at lunch. And thank you, Congressman Blackburn, for coming and joining us to talk about a very important topic.
It is.
I think the last 24 hours have raised a lot of questions about what it means to act together in concert, the word unity. And I'd just love to get your thoughts about that concept. Do you think women in office have a different conception of what the word unity means than men in political office?
Well, I think women probably have a stronger attachment to the word unity. All of us who have been moms and have tried to keep families and groups and organizations together, we like it when people will say, okay, now we're going to work together as a team. And my mom used to use an acronym. She used team, the word team, as an acronym. Together, everyone achieves more. And it is a great way to kind of underpin what being a team member and a team builder is. Now, when we look at unity in the Republican Party, we all do need to come together this week. There is a binary choice in this election. You've got Donald Trump or you've got Hillary Clinton. You've got one or the other. And you've got to choose one that lines up most with you. And I will tell you, I think that some of those who took that pledge, raised their hand, said they would support the ticket, and now are not coming forward to support that ticket. I think they do themselves a disservice, and they do their political careers and their legacies a disservice. It is time for everybody to come together and say, we've got an election to win in November. It's not only the top of the ticket, it is all of those down ballot races also.
When we think about the Republican Party, because there is precisely this split that we saw on display last night, who is going to be, are women in Congress going to be the ones that put the party back together? And we think about who's actually passing legislation, and it's often congressional women that come together across party lines to get things done. Do you think Republican women are going to play an active role in the circling of the wagons?
Yeah, I do. I think it is going to be somewhat up to Republican women to say, hey, you know, get those big boy pants on, and let's get ourselves in gear and let's go win this race. I thought the situation last night with Senator Cruz to ask to come, to accept the invitation to come, and then not to endorse, I thought that was most unfortunate in that it did not serve him well. And I think as he lets time and space play its course, he will look back at that at some point in time and say, why did I choose to do that? So I would have preferred to see everybody come together. It doesn't matter if it is a community, a state, if it is our nation. We are going to achieve more when we agree on the things that unite us. And Republican women will take a lead in reuniting our party and encouraging these guys. As I've said several times this week, same thing I would tell my kids when they were growing up, get over yourself. Or as Taylor Swift would say, shake it off. Let's go, let's move on. We've got bigger goals to achieve.
I guess I wonder, and I don't mean to sound, I worry that I sound sexist when I say this, but it's hard to imagine a woman in office doing what Ted Cruz did.
Yeah,
it seemed like a
it
very
is.
sort of masculine, macho thing to.
Yeah.
And he's been criticized for sort of putting himself before. I mean, at once putting himself before the party and proposing that what he's doing is to save the party. I mean, it's a sort of a snake eating. It's circular logic. But when that all transpired, what was your initial reaction?
When it all transpired, well, first I'll say, circuitous in its logic is a correct term, because you wonder how you end up with that as a decision. And as I heard it last night, my thought was, what is this going to accomplish? What does it accomplish? And if you're going to, you always have to think in the short term, the midterm, and the long term. Everybody in this room that is in business, you're always thinking, what is this going to do in the long term, and how would it affect an exit strategy? You think of that, because your decisions have consequences, and your actions have consequences. So I watched that last night, and I thought, okay, I'm not seeing much of an upside on this other than a short-term applause line, an immediate gratification type applause line. But you have to think in the long term, where is this going to get us? And if it is not something that is affirmative or positive or productive, then you have to say, why would I make that decision?
Let me ask you, sort of play the devil's advocate now, which is when we talk about women as consensus builders and team builders and not as sort of lone executives, does that sort of create an inherent bias against putting women into positions of singular leadership, which is to say governors or presidents? I mean, do we undermine women forging paths to the highest office in the land when we say, oh, but you guys are good at team building?
No, I don't think that we do at all. I think that women have a much more multifaceted approach to leadership, and they understand they're faster to make a decision to either go it along or to bring people in with them, because women are better at assessing what they're good at doing. And I think they affirm that within themselves. They know their strengths and weaknesses. Earlier in life, I believe, being a parent of female and male, I think women assess differently, and they ascertain what will be an achievement area earlier in life, and then they work to develop some of those skills. So I don't think saying women are more collaborative or good at team building is a negative. I see that as being something that is a positive. If you are not a leader, and here is one thing to remember in this, and I use this a lot when I speak to groups on leadership. Leadership is an action word. It is a verb. It is a verb. And it is important to realize that leadership is not something that is as it appears, it is as it performs. And that's what people want now, is something that you call performance-based leadership, somebody that's going to go in and going to get a job done and will come in ahead of schedule, will come in under budget. That is what people are looking for, and I think that's part of the frustration with the American electorate right now, is they're not seeing that out of our elected leaders. Why do we have so many successful female governors that are Republicans? Because they're building that team at the state level, and they are pushing forward on decisions that are productive for those states. And our states and some of these economies are doing very well.
I have to ask you, because we're sort of prizing the quality of leadership and consensus building. I know you're a Trump supporter.
Yes.
Donald Trump is, I think, not perhaps known for being a consensus builder or someone who is employed a great number of people and built a team. How worried are you about that?
Well, I would differ with that assessment. How many of you knew Mr. Trump before he came to elective office? Came into the presidential race? Just a couple of you. I've had the opportunity to know him since 2008. I was a surrogate for John McCain and worked with him through that campaign, worked with him in the 2012 campaign when I was one of the co-chairs for the Presidential Trust and for a surrogate for Romney in and out of New York. Got to know Mr. Trump and his team, had the opportunity to meet the children, visit with the Trumps when I would be in and out of New York. He is a terrific listener. He is interested in what you do. He is also interested in what you accomplish. He's very interested in how DC works and always had good, solid questions, as did people that were on his team. When I wrote a book 6 years ago on women in leadership and sent a galley to Mr. Trump, it came back to me with an endorsement and a liner note. And he is very interested in what people around him are doing. Talk to people that are in his organization. And you had Lynn's video last night that ran and talked about, as a minority female, the opportunities that had been open to her. And as you talk to people that have worked in his organizations, they talk about how engaging he is and how curious. And Donald Jr. spoke to that. They talk to people that have a PhD in common sense.
Sure, and I think maybe what you're pointing to is the gulf between the Trump organization, the business, and how that's been run over the years, and how I think a lot of people have been introduced to him, which is in the Trump campaign, which
That's
is
right.
seemingly a totally different beast.
Well, it is, but I will tell you, doing some of these Freedom Fest around the country through American Conservative Union, and Mr. Trump would be there to speak. I was one of the females there to speak, and the fabulous Carly Fiorina would many times be there to speak. And I got to see him there and on the stump. People relate to what he is saying, and he has tapped into the frustration and the anger of the American people this year more than anybody I think I've ever seen.
Let me talk to you about that, on the frustration and the anger. There are some people that have, Donald Trump's numbers among women are not great. He has 70%
That's
unfavorables among women. The party platform is pretty socially conservative. Do you worry that this Trump candidacy is alienating women, and specifically young women, that the Republicans may be wanting to make inroads with?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to consider in this. Number one, millennials are more pro-life than their moms. And
they're also more pro-LGBT.
That is true. And I think that, you're not going to see a great shift there. The two issues that come up most with women, national security and jobs and economic security. And that is where you're going to see a Trump-Pence ticket be able to take the lead. People they're tired of wage stagnation. They're tired of the impact of Obamacare on their checks. They're tired of having less take-home pay. They want to see more jobs growth. They have realized the impact of government regulation on the ability to grow jobs and to expand in the workforce, especially those that are in the energy sector. National security, it is an enormous issue. And you know what's so interesting to me? After James Comey and the FBI said, yes, we're watching terrorist cells in all 50 states, and said, yes, there are 1,000 cases with individuals and groups, terrorist-related, that we're investigating. I think that that is when people started to say, oh, wait a minute, you've got Little Rock, and you've got San Bernardino, and you've got Chattanooga, and you've got all of these, Orlando now, of course, and all these things that have happened. And if it can happen there, it can happen in my community. And so those are the issues that will be the drivers in this election season.
Let me just ask you one question before we go to the audience, which is one of the reasons a lot of women don't run for office is because at this point, campaigning, it's a gnarly process, right?
Sure.
And you look at 2016 and you look at the sort of anger, the vitriol, the back and forth. I mean, it is a mud pit. How worried are you that this turns a whole generation of women off?
Well, and I think the opportunity there is to run a campaign from the positive. When I put my name on the ballot in Tennessee to run for Congress, I ended up being the first female ever elected in her own right to the U.S. House. 4 had preceded me. They had followed either a deceased spouse or relative, and I was the first. In our state, we have still not ever had a female governor or a female U.S. senator. And it concerns me as we look at this. I'm an old county party chairman and have worked in the process for a long time. And you always want to have people coming through the process that are going to be able to step up and move to the next level, or that are involved, even if they're not in elective office, and ready to stand up and move in. And it is the things people say about you and the manner in which they try to discount what you have accomplished in your life are astounding. It is absolutely astounding. And I had a reporter yesterday, an MSNBC reporter, said something about, oh, don't you think that all of this against Hillary, it's so out of control? And I looked at it, I said, have you read my Facebook feed, my Twitter feed? You go read this. Let's go talk about how mean liberals can be to conservative women. Are you kidding? We're 4th. We're at the bottom of the rung in the pecking order, because, and much of it is because of the callous and the disrespectful and the distasteful nature in which men and liberal women many times will discount a Republican or a conservative female's point of view.
But surely when Donald Trump made those comments about Megyn Kelly, that wasn't
You're right.
a high point.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Full
Totally
stop.
agree with you. There are things he said that I don't agree with, and that I wish he had not said, and that he ought not to said. Totally agree with you. Yeah.
I've dominated this enough. Let's go to the audience for 1 or 2 quick questions if you want to raise your hand. Right over there.
How you doing? My name is Byron Hinton. I'm from Thomas Nelson Community College in Virginia. And first of all, I'm definitely...
I can hardly hear you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Byron Hinton. I'm from Thomas Nelson Community College, and I'm looking forward to seeing you speak later on tonight.
Thank you.
But the one question I do have, with this being a Pathways to Power about women in politics, what tips do you have to give to women who want to actually start a pathway into politics?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for it. The tips to give are to realize that leadership skills are a transferable commodity. And skills that you develop in one arena of life, you can move to the public sector. And then be ready to tell your story and talk about the validity and the success of your story. And don't let people tell you it is not worthy. And many times we've talked about if a man had his name on my resume, or if it were gender blind, then what would people say? Because my resume is I went out when I was in college. I talked a door-to-door book sales company in Nashville, Tennessee, the Southwestern company, into hiring me. One of the first females they had ever hired, the first female in the South. Not only did I finish that first summer making $3,654.27, I built one of the largest sales organizations that company has ever seen. I'm on the wall of greats at that company. I built a women's division for that company. And then I started my family. I ran a retail promotions division for the Kastner Knott Company, which was part of Mercantile Stores, in charge of 13 stores in retail fashion and promotional events. I started my own company, hung out my shingle, chaired many nonprofit boards, and yes, they were legitimate nonprofits and not like the Clinton Foundation. and then I served as head of the Tennessee Film Entertainment Music Commission. I spent many years doing consumer segments on TV, and then went to the state senate, led a 4-year fight against imposition of a state income tax in my state, which has been the basis of Tennessee not having a state income tax now and being one of the 3 top states in the country for business, and then went to Congress as the first female to ever hang out her shingle and win that seat. And there are still people that say, well, you worked in fashion. Well, what's wrong with that? Give me all the people that enjoy fashion and let them vote for me. You know?
There's nothing wrong with fashion.
There's nothing wrong with it, is it? So, you know, and it's how people begin to look at it. Or they'll say, well, you like to cook. Well, so what? Yeah, I do. You know, so tell your story. Be ready to tell your story. If you do not define yourself, they will define you for yourself.
Right on. Congresswoman Marcus Blackburn, it's great to talk with you. Thank
Good
you for your
talking to
time.
you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you both so much. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our underwriters with some of their perspective. Lauren Leader-Chevet. She is co-founder and CEO of All In Together. Lauren. Susanna Welford is the founder and president of Running Start. Susanna. And Erin Los Catraro is co-founder and CEO of She Should Run. And here to lead the conversation with a beautiful colored dress is Laura Cox Kaplan. She leads Government Regulatory Affairs and Public Policy at PwC. Laura, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. What a pleasure to be here, and what a pleasure to see such a packed audience, including so many men. We were marveling behind the scenes at how excited we are to see this amazing crowd. So I think you could accurately describe this panel as one of the problem solver panels. Congresswoman Blackburn laid out a number of the challenges, but what we want to talk about as some of the opportunities to really partner between the private sector and the nonprofit sector to really move the ball. From a PwC standpoint, a few years ago, it occurred to me that we weren't taking advantage of all the different potential levers to try to move the needle related to gender diversity in elected office. And I reached out to a number of experts, including members of Congress, academics, heads of think tanks and trade associations, and these amazing women on this panel, among a number of others. And we put together a strategy that helps us change our mindset as we think about gender diversity and the role of the private sector in terms of engagement. We actually set aside resources political resources that we would not necessarily have considered from a gender standpoint, and actually dedicated a percentage of those resources specifically for women, incumbent women and challenger women. We also changed our giving strategy so that we could give more money early to really have an impact in the primaries where we felt like that money could make a real difference. And then the other thing that we did that brings me to the topic of our panel today was creating some partnerships with nonprofit organizations that were doing really interesting things in this space. So it is a real pleasure to be here with these amazing women who are not only talented, but also my friends. So it's a real thrill to have Lauren and Susanna and Erin here today. Let's kick it off by talking first about how your organizations are unique and which aspects of these challenges that we encounter in terms of increasing the number of women in elected office, what are each of your organizations doing to try to address this?
You can start. You want me to kick it off?
Yeah, kick it off.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Erin Los-Cutraro. I am co-founder and CEO of She Should Run. She Should Run plays a really interesting role in the overall work of advancing women in government, in that we really aim to inspire and encourage women and girls to see what is possible through elected office. So we saw this opportunity to amplify the overall conversation through culture, through partnerships, et cetera, about how we can get new voices to the table, how we can get women and girls to see themselves in those positions of leadership. And then in terms of our programs, we're really at that place where it's about the women who are not yet thinking about public service, and we're trying to make that case.
That's perfect, Susanna.
So I'm the president and founder of Running Start, and we are a perfect complement to each other. Actually, all three of these groups on the panel, because we start with Running Start. We deal with very young women. We deal with high school women. The youngest are 14, and our idea is the earlier you start talking to women about leadership, about what they're capable of doing, the more they're going to want to do it, and the more they're going to feel like they have what it takes to do it. So we do college programs and young professional programs, but to me, the heart of it is high school. And we've been doing this now for 10 years. We have had 10,000 young women go through our programs, and we're seeing it happen. So it's so exciting. Like they are running for office. And if I didn't mention this, because I can't remember if I did, we're absolutely, totally nonpartisan. And one of the big things that we do is we're trying to not just tell the girls get into politics, we want them to get into politics the right way and to talk to each other and figure out how to connect across ideologies, et cetera.
So, and all three of our organizations are nonpartisan, actually. Yep. And it's one of the things that unites us, and that is one of the values that we share. And I'll just say one word about that, and that is, I know all of us believe, all of us on this stage believe, and I think many of you in the room believe, that if you believe in amplifying women's voices, you have to believe in that whether you agree with those voices or not.
That's right.
All of our voices matter, whether we agree with them or not. And I think over the years, many of the focus on women's leadership has become probably more partisan than we would like to see. We want women on both sides of the aisle engaged in the political process, and really only by recognizing the importance of women's voices, no matter what, will we really make progress. So all in together, we're probably the newest of these organizations. We're just 2 years old, and we focus on working women. So we work with mid to senior level professional women across the Fortune 500 to teach them the tools of civic and political engagement. We absolutely hope some of them will eventually run for office, but we also recognize it's not a path for everybody. And the question is, what else can you do to have a voice, to have power, agency, impact in the political process, even if you're not going to run? And just a quick statistic, which these girls know, can recite any time of day or night. Every year, just as one example, every year Congress receives 2 million fewer letters and phone calls from American women than from American men. And so if we believe that our democracy is about representation, about sending people into elected office to represent our perspectives, we actually have some work to do in holding our leaders of both genders on both sides of the aisle accountable for representing our perspectives, but we also have to recognize that we have a part to play. And we have to stand up and speak up, and we need to play the game, in a sense, to change the game. We have to participate. And that's our focus at All In Together.
That's great. Okay, so let's jump into this notion
Yeah.
of partnership too,
Yep.
and how each of you work really uniquely with the private sector. I want to start with Erin, and I don't know if you guys had an opportunity. Her organization's partnering with a company that's producing some dolls. So I want, and specifically, if you had a chance to take a look at those, I want Erin to talk a little bit about that because it's amazing.
I'm excited to talk about it. How many of you got a Barbie when you came in? The Barbie vice president, president.
Yay,
Okay, there's some in the room. So we had the opportunity just last week to roll out a major partnership with Mattel for the president and vice president Barbie. And what was so exciting to us about this is it really fits in that how do we amplify the conversation about girls seeing leadership roles as possible? Anything is possible when it comes to what these girls can do. And you may think, why a toy? Why does a toy matter? Well, you know, the Barbie brand, this is important to know, has 99% brand recognition. And so what we were able to do in this partnership, and it was a powerful coming together of looking at ways to target a greater community to make the case for getting women and girls to think about elected office. And how are we targeting women through this? Well, the parents, right? So it's the parents who are thinking about the toys, and I have 2 girls myself that their daughters are playing with, where we're showing what can be done. So it's one way, and one way where we found a really effective kind of avenue into reaching lengths that we would have never been able to on our own.
Yeah, Susanna, how about you?
So I think when I first started doing this 10 years ago, companies were much more likely to just write me a check and say, you know, do with it as you will. And what's happened over the years is companies have realized that they are going to get much more bang for their buck if they are invested, if they work with us to figure out how to partner. So I'll give you 2 quick examples. I was meeting with the head of the Asia group in DC, and we were talking about how there are not enough Asian women in politics. It's one of the least represented groups. And he said, well, wait, why don't we start a scholarship for Asian women? And now we have you would not believe how many Asian women we have now applying to our program, but the numbers have quadrupled since before we did the scholarship. And then Walmart, a few years ago, 2009, a few years ago to me, they came to us and they said, would you consider doing a program? Here are the bones of it. You can build it out how you want. And now we have this wonderful fellowship program. We might not have thought of doing it, but the company realized that it would be good for them, good for us. And I also have to just say, Laura's worked with all 3 of our groups, and we talk about working as mentors with PwC, and so we're so grateful to you. And one more, KPMG has helped us today, so thank you for bringing us here so we have a platform to talk about our work.
Yeah. So for us, because we work with professional working women, you know, our corporate relationships are actually at the heart of how, it's sort of our distribution channel, right? It's actually how we get to women, and there are, I think, something like close to 15 million women. You know, if you count up all the working women in the many companies that we work with, these are huge numbers, and it's actually a great distribution. And one thing I'll just say, you know, in all the sort of the lean-in conversations that we've been having over these last few years, the amazing focus that we've had in this country on women stepping into business leadership, into entrepreneurship, I happen to think that the political leadership piece of this has largely gotten lost, and we have a whole generation of super accomplished, highly educated, extraordinary women who really could be doing more. And they are doing more, by the way. Even the most busy women in America, the ones, you know, who have families and full-time jobs and God knows how many other things, they're still making the time to volunteer in their communities at higher rates than men, but they don't see political and civic leadership as in that portfolio of ways to make the country better. And that's one of the things we really want to change. And, you know, Laura and PwC has been extraordinary for us, partially because I'm not a political expert. I wanted to learn, and so I went out and learned, and it's been through partnerships with PwC, with Pfizer, who supported today's event, and others, that we've also learned how do you do this, and how do we find a way for women to engage in the political process that feels great. Now, I just want to ask one thing, because I think, how many women in this room actually are either in elected office or have run or are currently in elected office? Can we see some hands? I know there were a few here.
You.
I know there was
Yeah.
one in the back.
Great, terrific.
Woohoo.
Thanks for being here. It's awesome.
That's awesome. You guys deserve a round of
So,
applause.
so
Anyway.
let's talk just quickly, and I'm very sensitive of our time here, but organizations like mine and the organizations that are represented in the audience are very concerned on return on investment always, right? So making sure that our investment dollars are actually working to move the needle. So let's talk a little bit about that ROI and how you all seek to work with these corporate entities to make sure that they're getting the bang for their buck, and how do you sort of encapsulate that and describe it to them so that maybe organizations that are a little slower to come around to investing in this space maybe see it a bit more clearly. What can we do
The
differently?
political world generally has been a kind of complicated one for private companies to get engaged with for all the reasons that you would imagine, the fear that it's divisive and that it creates complicated issues. But the reality is that every company is focused on developing future leaders, whether that's female leaders or all leaders, and I think many companies are especially invested in developing the next generation of women leaders. And the point is there's not enough leadership opportunities inside the walls of our companies. We need to take the boundaries off of that. And I think part of what's been amazing about these partnerships is we've helped companies find ways to give their women more opportunities outside their jobs to build a portfolio of leadership skills. And I think for them, that it may not be exactly measurable, but the impact is huge.
It's a long-term game.
Yeah.
I mean, with our high school students, our college students, it'll be a long time before they grow into leaders that could say, be useful to corporations. But we are building the next generation of leaders, and it's a great investment, we think.
And I would just add to that, it's not without challenge too. As we operate in an increasingly partisan society, it's difficult for corporations to come to the table sometimes, especially in work that might be perceived as partisan in some way. And I think our organizations are good representations of how we've made safe spaces to be able to get this done and to look at this problem, because without these private sector partnerships, we're not going to see clarity in our lifetime.
Yeah. On your way out, you're all going to get a little card that has 3 solutions, 3 suggestions of what each of us can do to create greater opportunities for women in public service. And I really encourage everyone to keep thinking about that. We could talk about the problem all day long. I think we all get it, but there are solutions, and we spend all of our time trying to work on them and getting others to help us.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, and we'll close on this note, I think too, in addition to the tips that Lauren's providing, also thinking creatively about where you sit and your network of contacts around you and what you're responsible for. What kind of budget do you have? Is there a way to retool your elements of your budget, if you're in a private sector entity, to try to move the needle, to invest in some of these areas, whether it's with the incredible women that are on the stage with us today, or in other efforts that can help to move the needle to really close this gap. So I'm so privileged to have been here today, to have these amazing women on the panel with me. Join me in thanking them, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much, Lauren Leader-Chavez of All In Together, Susanna Welford of Running Start, Erin Los-Cutraro, She Should Run, and Laura Cox-Kaplan from PwC. We're going to continue our conversation about women in politics with Ohio State Representative Sarah LaTourette. She's the Assistant Majority Whip in the Ohio House. Bettina Inclin is a seasoned communications and political strategist. She's a Senior Vice President with the public affairs firm Mercury. Barb Palmer is Professor of Politics at Baldwin Wallace University. She wrote the book. She was the co-author of Women and Congressional Elections, A Century of Change. And Washington Post columnist Kathleen Parker. Here to lead the conversation is my colleague, Washington Editor-at-Large with a chair.
Chair. Thank you so much, Margaret. And I just want to say a special shout out to everybody on the stairs and up here. It's going to be like a TV show where at the end of the show, you pick who you really like the best, because you can't see any of them, and the winner will come out, okay? So I want to say apologies for the folks up there. They've been very patient. And I'll try to sit up here so we can at least wave to each other. It's great to be here. I also want to note that Kathleen Parker, in terms of editorial tension, wrote this book in 2008. I love the title, Save the Males, Why Men Matter, Why Women Should Care. So, Kathleen, thank you for that.
But what you
Yeah.
don't know is that halfway through it, my editor at Random House called me and she said, "Why are we writing this book?" She said, "Let's make the next one Shoot the Bastards."
Well, it's great, and we're really happy to have a. Now, let me ask you, and I want to start. We're going to have a conversation with Barbara Palmer, who has written this book that I'm going to order right away: "Women in Congressional Elections: A Century of Change." And essentially, the first female member of Congress was what, 1916, if I'm right. And since that time, in all elected positions, women have only occupied about 10% of them, if I got the blurb right. How much? 2%. 2%? Much worse than I thought.
Yeah.
So I guess the question I have, you've written a lot about gendermandering and what the blocks are to women moving into positions of power and responsibility in public service. What are the bottom line zingers in why, given a century of this, the situation is so bad?
Yeah. Before we get to that, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a local, and so I want to welcome you all to Cleveland. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you for having us.
And I just closed on a new condo yesterday, so it's official, I'm a Clevelander. And welcome, and I hope you're having a fabulous time, so welcome to Cleveland. Yeah, and so in my research, I'm a social scientist, I love big data, and trying to get a handle on sort of the big picture and the rules of the game and how the rules of the game structure people's choices. And so two of the biggest blocks that women face that aren't necessarily on their surface gendered, but have ramifications for female candidates are incumbency and gerrymandering. Most incumbents are men, and incumbents win at tremendously high rates. Even in this day and age, we tend to think of, throw the bums out. Most incumbents are really smart, and if they think they're going to lose, they don't run again. And most incumbents are men. And so whether you want more women, more people of color, more teachers, fewer lawyers, you name it, it just takes a long time because there's so few opportunities.
A century?
2 centuries.
Well, okay.
Yeah, really a century. This whole idea of careerism and incumbency really only started about 80 years ago. And ironically enough, that's at the point in our social history when women actually started running. And so just as women are starting to become incredibly politically involved about 100 years ago in the progressive movement, in prohibition, in all of the big social movements that were happening 100 years ago, women are incredibly politically active and mobilized, running for office, running as third-party candidates. That's when we start to see careerism in Congress developing. That's when all of a sudden being a member of Congress for a really long time is suddenly desirable. And we joke that in the 1930s was when they installed air conditioning in the Capitol. And that's when you start to see long careers in Congress start happening. And then now when you combine that in the last 30 years with what's been happening with redistricting and gerrymandering, this is yet another roadblock. And so when you think about what's happening in the polarization of districts, and again, this isn't a Republican or a Democratic thing, it's who controls that process in the state legislature. And whatever party is in power, they're going to want to control that process and make it as advantageous for their party as possible. What happens though is when you draw extremely Democratic districts, you actually make it slightly easier for a Democratic woman to win that district because of the perceptions that voters have about female candidates. When you draw extremely conservative districts, because of the types of voters that tend to be in those districts, you're actually making it harder for a woman to win those districts. And so what we've seen in the last 20 years is, as we've had this slow increase in the number of women in Congress, it's really only happening among the Democrats.
So I'm a really impatient guy. And Sarah, Bettina, I don't know how either of you, but as I look at most big problems out there, someone in a business incubator is solving them with an app. Or we are looking at, what you're describing for me, I get it. I just don't understand why is it such a resilient problem? Why, given all the social science we have, given all the knowledge we have, given the crowd here today, is this stupid this is one of the topics I really don't want to be talking about in 5 or 10 years. So Sarah and Bettina, how, you were Mitt Romney's Hispanic outreach person. Sarah, you're cutting through and you're going to be in Congress here one of these days, I bet.
about that? Yeah.
So, to fix it for me. I mean, what would you guys do to solve this problem?
Yeah. Well, I also worked in the National Republican Congressional Committee, which is the political arm that helps recruit.
And are they
people.
really out there in a big way on this?
I think so. Last cycle, we started an effort called Project Grow, which was to identify opportunities for women to run in congressional seats. And a challenge is, the NRCC, our job is incumbents, is to protect incumbents, and also find opportunities to grow. So we identified places where there were great women to grow and to run for office, but a lot of this is, I know a million fantastic women. They just don't live in seats where they can win or that has an open congressional
So
opportunity.
doesn't that deal with the NRCC kind of keep women on the fringe?
No, well, unless I'm going to carpet bag and move a bunch of women to places where they have opportunities, it's a combination.
The Club for Growth goes in and savages moderate.
But they have
members
two.
of-
That's you're talking
But
about
why
a
don't-
very
yeah.
different kind of organization. So one of the things that, if we want to make a difference, I think there's two parts. One is recruitment. We know that it's very different to recruit women for office than men. Men wake up and say they think they're awesome, and women are like, no, you look beautiful, you look great. You have to convince them. It's the same
Do you want
thing.
to punch them?
But
I don't know if any of you are on the floor, but we have like a Ted Cruz thing going on with the backdrop here, so my apologies. It's sort of like what began to happen, him on the floor.
But like at the NRCC, Micah Yosefi, who's here from the NRCC, is doing a great job. And Neri Martinez, which is the Republican State Leadership Committee, are doing a great job with down ballot seats. And at the RSLC, at the state level, we have 3 times as many women running for office than before. 640 women down ballot. That is a great number. And those people become run for Congress, run for Senate. So it's getting those numbers. But a bigger problem, I think, is resources. We have these great women, but they don't make it through the primary because they don't have money.
Right.
They don't have the fundraising level to have them compete. So I think a big challenge that we don't address, especially as Republicans, is how are we making sure that our female candidates have the resources to compete? We have a lot of great PACs, but we don't have like huge amounts of money. Like we don't have an Emily's List on the Republican side that helps women give these, provide some of these resources.
I want to get Sarah in here real quickly, but I want to come back because as I was reading my material, you've basically been out there and say we women suck at raising money for ourselves.
Well,
like we're really good at raising money
I
for
wish we were
museums.
all more like Ann Wagner,
Yeah.
but which is a congresswoman who is an incredible fundraiser. But we don't always have the skills, and she has.
So I
we
want
have
to
to
hold
train
that
women to
point,
those
come to
skills.
Sarah for a minute, because when we think about solutions and solutions-oriented deals, I want to come back. And Kathleen, who's just so smart on all of this, I want to hear, if she were to write the great editorial for the Washington Post that would put this kind of topic out of business, what would it be? But Sarah?
Well, so I think this is a really interesting conversation, primarily because I come from an extremely conservative district. So when we're having the conversation that it's hard for women to kind of break through in some of these districts, I don't know that I saw that as much in my district, but I think you do see it across the state. And so to me, I think a way to fix that.
Does extremely conservative mean women in the home raising the children and not working? What does that mean?
I mean, a little bit, I think.
Yeah?
We have some more old-fashioned values. I live in Geauga County, which again, I'm pretty local as well, about 45 minutes east of here. And I mean, it's an older population. We're a little bit more traditional in our values out there, I think. And so I think that's a piece of it. But I think as far as women are concerned, I mean, so I come from a political family,
Right.
which
I
you
know
had
your
pointed
father,
out.
yeah.
So everybody assumes that I decided to run for office because my dad was in politics and it was just what I thought I needed to do. But I really come from the nonprofit world. My background's primarily in nonprofits and making a difference in my community that way.
So you know how to raise money.
Sometimes. If I'm motivated enough, absolutely. I should do a better job for myself, but yes. And so I come from that background, and I think that if we could connect those dots for more women, I think you look in the nonprofit field, and it's dominated by women. I mean, we have a significant amount of women working in that field, and if we could get them to realize that when they're in their communities and they're making a difference and they're working on things they're passionate about, that ties into politics perfectly. You don't need to just segregate the two. You can very easily be passionate about something and springboard that into running for office, which is what kind of caused me to run for office. I worked for a nonprofit called Adoption Network Cleveland, very passionate about issues that we were working on, and my legislator wasn't supportive of legislation that was moving through the House, and so you start looking into it and you realize that you really can make a difference. And so I think if we could just get that message out to more women and make them realize, you don't have to choose between being a good mother and a good public servant. I had a kid
So
3
women still
months
can
ago.
have it all.
Absolutely. I had a child 3 months ago. I took 2 weeks off. I came back, and I was elected by my peers to serve as our assistant majority whip. And so I think that you can be very good at your job, and you can be a very good mother at the same time, and we just need to make sure more women are receiving that message.
Kathleen, thank you. Kathleen, you distill the pathways to power better than almost anyone I know. How when you look at what is happening right now politically in both parties, so we're here in the, largely talking about the Republican circle, but you saw what just happened with a lot of young millennial women who joined up and signed up for Bernie Sanders. It seems like this is an inflection point at some level for identity where it's both getting deeper but also more fragmented. How important, when you're in Washington and we're both in the cocktail party scene, is this really? I do like a good cocktail party in D.C.
I remember when somebody asked John McCain what he thought about my remarks about Sarah Palin, which were not flattering. He said, "Oh, that's just somebody trying to get on the cocktail circuit." Well, I just sit on my front stoop and drink wine with my gay neighbors, and I don't even know what that cocktail circuit looks like, but I'm going to go with you, okay? I've just been listening, and I think all of you've made very good and interesting points. I think partly what we have is generational. I mean, I belong to the baby boomer generation, and I think we were highly motivated politically in terms of the Vietnam War and women's rights and those kinds of things, but we weren't really thinking in terms of running for public office. And I do think younger women are much more likely now to see that as available to them. But I think what may be missing from the conversation generally is that women don't necessarily, I hate speaking monolithically because it just doesn't mean anything, but for purposes here, women don't see the necessity of their serving in public office so much as perhaps men do, because men, as someone brilliantly said, they wake up in the morning, they say, yes, I am man, I can do this. Women go to the library, they research, they take notes, they study, and then they go, I can't do that, And plus they see how horrible it is for women. We've witnessed Hillary Clinton's career all these years, and whether you like her or don't like her, we know that she's been put through the ringer, not only by other men, but by her own husband. So it's hard work to be a woman in public office. It's hard work to be a woman in corporate America. It's just harder. And I don't know that we don't make it a little bit harder on ourselves unnecessarily. Because we are so studious, and we are just by nature, we want to get it right, and we want to make sure everybody's okay. We have to sort of, I think, just pretend we just shoot up with testosterone in the morning and just say, yes, I can do this. But the thing about knowing you need to do it, I'm going to just tell you one quick little anecdote. I was able to go to the Middle East with Laura Bush when she was launching the breast cancer initiative in these countries where women haven't had a voice about anything in their lives. But suddenly they were able to talk about their health care. But what struck me, one of the countries we visited was Kuwait. And this was the year that women had been granted the vote. Okay, this is 2007. We met with the women who had actually run for public office. There were 7 or 8 of them. None of them won. They had to go out into the countryside and talk to men who didn't think women ought to be doing anything except, whatever, So I was just so struck and so touched and moved by these women, and all I could think about was how brave they were and how they just wanted to have a vote. They wanted to have a voice. They wanted to have some control over their own destiny. And we know that sort of intellectually, but to feel it in the present tense and to witness suffrage at the ground level was a life-altering experience for me. I was a born-again feminist, I said, because I thought, women have to run for public office because they can. You have a duty, not only to your country, but to the world and to your children and to making the world a better place. We are different than men, and we do have different talents and gifts. And that is not in any way to denigrate the talents of men. I did write the book, Save the Males. I actually love men. I've raised 3 myself. And so I think somehow in all of this, we need to talk more about what public service really means and why women can be such so valuable to that process. Now, I'll tell you, it's hard to be in the legislature and Congress because Republican women quietly will tell me, lip service. Lip service. They'll say, oh yeah, we're for women, but lip service. And I can't speak openly about some of the things I know about how that works exactly, but it's not easy. But women you have to be not only tough, but you have to be smart.
You should change the names and write some fiction about it.
You have to be smart. Yeah, I could do that.
Oh, that would be good.
Lock me up.
We're going to go into lightning round in our 3 minutes and 23 seconds. Maybe since we added Kathleen, we get 2 more minutes. I don't know. It depends. Alex Wagner's over here, ready to take the stage. Come join you. Okay, great. But in terms of thinking then again about fixing this, Bettina, you talked about women being bad fundraisers for themselves. I just want to just quickly go through this issue. We had a cover story of The Atlantic with Katty Kay and Claire Shipman that was talking about the confidence problem. And they actually wanted to go out and train women on, and just sort of say, you know what, there's a confidence problem out there, and then let's just move forward and get beyond that and do that. I was always uncomfortable with that because I sort of felt like, I don't want to be out there telling people that they're not confident or whatever. And it was, and I worried that there are a lot of women, if you want to make money and you're in publishing, do a powerful women's conference. There are a lot of them. But what about the least powerful women? And I'm sort of interested in how you change the game on people, not on the upper end who have a lot of privilege and opportunity, but for women in general who are just trying to get by, live their lives. And it's from those people who have real problems that you want to bring into public service and into public leadership. Bettina?
Well, I do want to clarify. I don't think that women suck at raising money for themselves. I just think it's a different challenge. When you're telling someone, I want you to run for Congress, but you're going to have to raise them between $1 million to $3 million, that's a daunting number for someone who might have run for a state house race, and the most they ran on a high level was $250,000. That's a lot. So I think, again, it goes to resources. We have to figure out what we do as a community to get more resources to help these women, be it more PACs or more efforts or have some more of a commitment to help them raise more money, because we don't talk about that. We end the conversation at recruitment and not how do you get them through the primaries. Their challenge is they can't get to the primary because they don't have the money, so they can't go to the general to be elected.
Well, that's such an important point, if I may just say, because Emily's list goes out and actually recruits people. They train them, they fund them, they do everything for them. And the Republican women simply don't have that. And if you are a pro-life woman running for public office, you have no support. You just don't.
How much money do you have to raise for your seat?
I happen to come from, again, a very conservative district, and so in a general election, it's maybe not as challenging as some of our districts, but I would say some of our members, absolutely, it's a couple $100,000 to be able to maintain their seat. Here in the state of Ohio, at least in our Republican caucus, we have a great team that's out there really helping us raise money, and I think they do a good job doing just that, getting women out there, women and men, and training them on how to raise money for themselves.
Well, Barbara, if frameworks for money were if that architecture was available on a larger basis, do you think it would move the needle on representation?
It might.
But you're doubtful. I can see the cynicism.
Here's my take on this. Eleanor Roosevelt had this great quote. She said, "We will have reached true equality when there are as many stupid women in Congress as there are stupid men." And so, I think I'm kind of with you on this. There's a very simple solution. Just do it. And there is something that every single person in this room can do. Find a woman in your life and tell her to run. It's that simple. That's how you get over this confidence gap. Women are not told they should run for office as often as men are, even by their own spouses. And it's something as simple as that I think can have a truly major impact on this.
So we can grab 2 more minutes. I know. Yes.
I got to make one point about the money.
Okay. Okay. Well, real quick. Yeah.
So women are also half as likely to give to candidates when they run for office. So it's not just that women are struggling to run, it's that a lot of men think that the women are going to be giving to women candidates. Oh, it's a woman running, the other women are going to give them money. But then the women aren't doing it. There's one thing that we can all do. We should all be giving money to women candidates on both sides of the aisle because they need us, and we're 50% of the population. So 50% of the population are half as likely to give to women candidates. That's as big of a problem as whether or not we're asking.
Thank you so much. Just as we close out, let's just go down the aisle real quick. If you think, many of us are going to be in Philadelphia next week and see what the DNC does, and here we are. If you had one blind spot in either of the parties you thought really could be fixed, needed to be fixed, but moving the needle on something that you think that would dramatically have an impact politically on the what would that one thing be, Sarah?
Oh, goodness, that's a tough question. I mean, I think it's really is at the most basic level involvement. It's making people realize that just running for office isn't enough. You need to get out in your community, you need to be active, you need to be engaged, and you need to be present. And so if we could get more people to attend their council meetings, their trustee meetings, and just really get people out there interested in their community, I think that's going to make the absolute largest difference for both parties. We're going to get much better elected officials out of it.
Thank you, Bettina.
I think a take on that is continuing to, people want to be asked to the party. So I think we need to do a conscious effort to engage people and bring them to the table and make sure they're just not at the event, but at a seat at the table.
Barbara?
When women run, women win. It's as simple as making recruiting women a priority, no more lip service.
Kathleen?
Well, of course, what I want can't happen, but I would like for abortion to cease to be an issue, a litmus test on either side of the aisle, and just put it to bed.
So with that fascinating roster of solutions-oriented commentary, please thank Kathleen Parker, Barbara Palmer, Bettina Inclon, Sarah Lacherette. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.
And we're going to head right off here.
Exit.
Thank you
We
all.
have
Thank
another
you,
round with
Steve.
my friend Alex Wagner. It's not done yet, not done yet. Remember, if you give up your seat, there are people on the stairs that are going to take it.
Our last conversation of the afternoon is with two women who already see for a place for themselves in the halls of power. They are Glo Smith, a Republican candidate for Congress from Florida's 5th District. She grew up poor in Jacksonville, Florida. Despite significant challenges, she earned a business degree, became an entrepreneur, and she built child care establishments in low-income areas in the state, and she is making her second run for office. Ohio State Representative Christina Hagan is 27 years old. She's juggled her official office duties while working in a restaurant and at her family's plumbing business to pay off student loans. And back with us, Alex Wagner, my colleague, to lead the conversation. Alex.
Thank you. There's some seats up here if you guys in the back want to come up. Or you can stay in the back and drink wine. So I think one of the things about conquering fear is, like, I find this helpful to look at sort of the worst case scenario, wrap your arms around it and say, okay, I can manage that. So what I've heard a lot of is the fundraising aspect for running for office is really daunting for a lot of women. You guys both are in elected office. Share with us, if you will, the worst story you have about fundraising, the most awkward moment, and sort of how you dealt with that and kept on trucking, as it were. Glo, you want to start?
Well, sure. I think my probably the worst moment of fundraising came for me. I was actually knocking on doors, and this young man answered his door and then came out, and he had guns on him. And I was like, whoa. And it happened to be the subdivision right next to where I live. And being the kind of person I am, I looked at him and I said, my husband's guns are bigger than yours. And I said, and he's got a whole law enforcement team that's willing to back him up with many, many more guns. So he thought it was so funny. He said, you know what, I'm going to give you a donation. I don't even know who you are, what you're running for, but I'm going to give you a donation just so your husband and his big guns don't come. But
wow, armed threats.
Yeah. And he did. So, you know, I really did not have, for me, difficulty raising funds. Something ugly happened to me, and as a result, people around the country was angry. When I first ran for Congress, someone took my sign, and I am a Black conservative Republican, and that's not always something that people talk about openly within my own race. And so someone took one of my signs and painted my face white, and it really became, it gained a lot of national attention. And people heard about the story, and they were so mad and outraged, and they were like, we're going to do something to help this young lady. Send your money. Okay, I'll take it. But, you know, I was so okay with it because I was like, look, I was a Black conservative my entire life, and I'm used to things like this. It should not happen, but it does. And so people started sending money in, and honestly, we had one of the 3 campaigns in the country where 97% of our funds, when we raised over just under $170,000, was all small donation. And 75% of our donation came from women from around the country.
That's great. I'm just going to make one housekeeping announcement. Folks in the back, please enjoy yourselves, but try and keep your volume down if you can. It's a little noisy up here. When you had signs of your face painted in whiteface, that's really intense. But it sounds like money actually kind of made it better in that.
It did. You know, it turned sour lemons into really sweet lemonade. And but not only that, it started a conversation and a dialogue about why I was a Black conservative, and I get to share the history of the Republican Party and what it means to African Americans with people, and it just opened up more doors for me.
Christina, tell us about your worst fundraising experience and how you dealt with it.
Sure. I was actually 19, running my first campaign. My poli-sci professor told me you couldn't be a Christian, be involved in politics. And I was waiting on a table of high-powered lobbyists and CEOs. And I was actually telling them my story, letting them know that I was actually running for state legislator at 19 in House District 50, when I was sick, working 3 jobs, and going to school. And I was reaching over the CEO of First Energy, actually, and somebody was talking with their hands and knocked a dish full of sun-dried tomato-based oil on this gentleman's coat. I read in the paper the next week his salary increase, which is probably more than I'll make in my entire lifetime. And I thought, this man will never contribute to my campaign. But then I really prayed about the situation. I reinvested in my message. I went and I met with him, and he wrote me a $5,000 check.
Wow. Wait, unpack that. You went from like the sun-dried tomato incident, we'll call it.
Yes.
To you circled your own wagons and prayed on it. Why did you do that? I mean, why not just give up at that point?
Well, I think we all face embarrassing moments, regardless of our walk of life, whatever our career is. There's a moment that can be pivotal into saying, I'm only meant to be what I am right now, or I can pray to God to invest in my direction and help guide me where I need to go. And that's really what I saw in my campaign time and time again when the party failed me, when the funds weren't coming in, when they were actually spending $70K against me in my first non-incumbent open seat primary. I knew I'm investing in the values of my party, in my faith, and what I believe in. I'm not investing in the party as a whole. I'm investing in service to people, and God really reminded me of that and gave me direction when I was defeated in my first primary, because it was only 3 years later that the Speaker of the House appointed me to be the youngest female in the history of the state.
So we've talked a lot about what can be done to encourage women to run for office in election years. But what needs to be done in the off years? I mean, this is sort of like a harvest, right? You have to sow the seeds of success. How are women not being talked to or encouraged when we're not focused on elections?
Right. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is we wait until people turn 18 or older. And my passion is to go after young people, to introduce them to everything in the political arena on both sides of the aisle, and to introduce them to people where they can actually put a face to an elective office at the local, state, and national level. Invite them to come to meetings, whether it's city council or whatever. Town halls. So one of the things that I like to do is mentor young men and women, especially people of color, to introduce them to the entire political arena. I was very fortunate because my stepfather, who raised me, was from Trinidad and Tobago, and as a little girl, he got us involved in political campaign. I didn't know what a Democrat was or a Republican was, but he said, you know what, you have an obligation and a responsibility to learn everything you can about your country. And so I happen to have fallen in love with it. I have 7 sisters and brothers. Out of all of them, I was the one who was very passionate. So my entire life, I was doing things and politically active. And that was really, and my father was a business owner as well. And so I love business and politics equally. But I found that I was really, really better at helping people attain their goals of becoming an elected official. It wasn't until 2013, after I had finished working for the Lieutenant Governor of Florida and Governor Scott of Florida, that honestly, I was driving down the road one day and the Lord said, you need to run for Congress. And I'm like having a literal conversation going, who, Lord? Who need to run for Congress? You guys realize who's in office now, who's been in office for the last 20 years? And so it became real. And what I called my husband right away and I said, the Holy Spirit just talks to me about running for office. Well, I always share that story. And you know, people who don't have a faith like me don't believe it. So they said, you shouldn't say God told you to run. You shouldn't do that. And I was like, well, I truly believe that. Long story short, I like to journal, and I like to journal my quiet times and devotion. And what God showed me was over the last 30 years of my life, He had been preparing me. When I was that little girl born in the projects, you know, to a mom on welfare, depending on government commodities to take care of me, when He placed my stepfather in my life and he made the difference, and then when we were able to move out of the projects now into a thriving Black community where my next door neighbors were doctors and lawyers, community leaders, they own their own homes, their own businesses, those things were the foundation. And then every experience I had through, even to being able to work for the first Black governor, a lieutenant governor of the state of Florida, and going on to work for Governor Scott, I'm going, really, Lord, me, this little child from the from the projects that, people said would never be anything because of who I was, but my parents always told me where I came from would not define me.
I mean, I also think that anybody that's heard you speak for 2 minutes is like, yes, obviously you should be in public life. So I'm hearing mentorship either from the man upstairs or from
Us,
family members,
early on,
or the lady upstairs, whatever God may
Yeah.
be. But there are books like Lean In, where Sheryl Sandberg's like, you don't have to be. Women subscribe to this idea that they have to be mentors, and like she suggests that we throw that out the window. So I mean, where were you? I mean, you obviously are very faithful, but like the question of mentorship, how critical is that?
I would say it's vital in a lot of ways that we should both be mentored and mentoring others as Christ came out and discipled with people and he trained people to spread the message. So we're talking a lot about God today. That usually doesn't happen. So I'm going to say my pastor's here. He's the catalyst. But the truth be told, you talked about campaigning versus not campaigning, what you do in the off season. I think what you do in the off season is you show your heart and your passion, your desire to serve. You be a public servant versus a politician. And in our case, that has massively transformed our district. We went from spending $750,000 winning the district that I now serve in to not even spending $1,000 in the general campaign, and I've won by 20 and then 29 points. And I think that could be attributed to meeting people where they are, loving them, serving them, going door to door in the off season to say, hey, I'm here to serve you, versus
you go door to door in the off season.
Yeah, we go door to door. We go to the schools. I think you give the opportunity to lift somebody up everywhere that you go, and that will pay greater dividends than asking for a check or sending out a mailer or doing the campaign work. So it's changed the dynamic drastically in my particular district, and I think the more you do to connect all year round and you're doing your job, people are going to see that, value it, and lift it up and support you regardless if they agree with your political affiliation. They connect with you. We've had Democrats and independents support us, and I also am a conservative Christian legislator.
We have time for one question from the audience, if anybody.
It can't be over already.
I know.
Wow.
I mean, who do we blame for this?
The guy before
Ourselves.
us.
Yeah, no. Steve's, I blame myself because I took too long in my first panel. Over here.
Hi, Emily Cadet with Newsweek. And I'm curious if you as women running for office are concerned about the fact that we're seeing in the polls what could be an historic gender gap in November between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and whether you're worried as Republican women that could affect down ballot races.
I could speak to this first, if you don't mind. My perspective is that we are the 24% of women that are currently elected in elective office. We've had less than 1.5% of governors be females in the history of this nation. We have a lot of work to do. But gender does not, in my mind, define your capacity to do the job. I have an Imago Dei thought process. We are all made in the image of Christ, in my perspective, which means anything is accomplishable. And our nation isn't necessarily way behind. We're all thinking, probably as millennials specifically, what's wrong with America? Only 24% of women in office are females. Well, that's actually trending higher than the global trend. So I think what we do is we continue to invest in the value of young women in the school system. We continue to mentor them, provide apprenticeship, internship opportunities, and guide them. We found a lot of value in having young women, both Democrats and Republicans alike, come to the office and shadow to experience their government. And when you do that, that's what empowers women. So I think every chance we get to mentor a young woman, we should be doing that. And also programs like YWCA that existed yesterday here at the RNC for all walks of life was an opportunity to get them in front of strong female leaders. That's how we change the tide. I don't think the numbers really matter. I think it matters that we get the right people in the job and we build confidence in women to do what they're passionate about. I happen to be a mother. I'm equally passionate about raising my daughter as I am to ensuring that there's positive policy in the state of Ohio. We should be promoting all types of leadership, and women will fall where God has for them.
And for me, I think, a big concern is, right now we have over 23 million women in this country that are not registered to vote. In Florida, we have about 1 million that are not registered to vote. So when I'm not campaigning, I serve as the campaign chair for the Florida Federation of Republican Women, and I serve as the spearhead chair of campaigns for the National Federation of Republican Women. And I do that because I feel that we have to have women actively involved, and your vote count. And so my heart desire is to go after all of those women. And I just share my story. I just talk about why voting is so important, you know. And sometimes I talk to women. In fact, I've met 3 or 4 women in the last week that are in their 40s that have never registered to vote because they feel like their vote don't count. And I said, do you not realize how powerful we are? We're going to be over 53% of the voting population this time. And so the more we have, the more opportunities we have to vote other women into office. And, you know, one of the things that I think is really important is that you share your stories with these young ladies as you meet them. I don't have well, maybe my story is a little bit different, you know, when I talk about...
Yes, I think it is.
It is. You know, when I think about voting rights, you know, I share the story of my husband's grandfather and great-grandfather was Thomas Sterling Delaney, and he was the first black voter registrar in Florida during Reconstruction in 1865. He went on to serve as the second black in the Florida House of Representatives, but his son served as commissioners now. His children and his wife were slaves. He were not. And so I talk about the rich heritage of the Delaney family, and then I tell them my story. You know, I say, look, my third great-grandfather was a Confederate soldier in Georgia at the same time my husband's father was escaping with his wife and 14 children. And then, you know, we just start from there, and then one thing leads to another, and how does that get to voting? And then I tell the story of how African Americans couldn't vote and what the Republican Party did and stood for that helped us to get into positions that we could have never gotten to based on the other party ideology at that time. So I think that as we share our stories, especially with young people, and we encourage each other, we say you could be anything you want to be.
Absolutely.
No one can hold you down but you. So I tell you, when it comes to fear, sometimes I'm scared, but I always face it, and I say, you know what, where is fear? It's false evidence appearing to be real. Right. It's like weeds that appear to be a flower, you know? And I try to identify those things, pluck them out the way, and move forth and go in the direction that God has me to go in.
Shattered glass ceilings.
They don't sound that worried, in other words.
I don't.
Thank you all for your time. Thanks for coming. It was great to speak with you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Glo. Thank you, Christina. Last, I just want to once again thank Running Start, all in together, and She Should Run for making this gathering possible. Have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy each other. Enjoy what's left of the food and the rest of the convention. Thank you so much for coming.